Σας ευχαριστούμε που ήρθατε. Καλησπέρα σας. Η γλώσσα της σημερινής ομιλίας θα είναι στα αγγλικά, έτσι, οπότε θα γυρίσω κι εγώ στα αγγλικά για να παρουσιάσω τον σημερινό ομιλητή. So, Dr. Γιώργος Μωραΐτης is a historian specializing in modern Chinese history and Sino-Greek relations. He's currently a Chinese history lecturer at the Department of Political Science in the University of Crete and an associate researcher at the Institute for Mediterranean Studies in Rethymno. He's also a postdoctoral researcher with the East China program at Pantheon University, focusing on the history of Sino-Greek maritime trade, and he has produced a really interesting paper that you can find on this website. He received his PhD from Queen's University Belfast, where his research explored China's early engagement with Western international law. He also holds an MA in Politics, Society and Economy of Asia from Leiden University and a BA in Political Science from the University of Crete. His work has been published in Taiwan Historical Research and the Robert Hart Project Working Papers, and his monograph, Robert Hart and Sino-Foreign Disputes in Qing China, Negotiating Sovereignty, was published by Palgrave Macmillan in 2025. Dr. Mωραΐτης has received several distinctions, including a Marie Curie PhD Fellowship and the Huayu Enrichment Scholarship. In addition to his academic writing, he has organized international workshops, such as the 2025 event Greeks in the 1930s Shanghai, Life and Community in a City of Transformation. So, Giorgio, thank you for being here with us, and the floor is yours.
All right. Thank you so much, Kostas. Thanks, everybody, for being here. My presentation today is basically the fruit of my labor here at this China program. And once again, I would like to thank Kostas and everybody here working at this China program for making this research possible. So without further ado, I'm going to start my presentation. Greek ship owners have long been recognized for their ability to operate across politically volatile and commercially uncertain environments. This presentation examines how such adaptability can be observed in the career of Emmanuel Giannulatu and his company, China Hellenic Lines, one of the earliest Greek shipping ventures to establish a sustained presence in China during the first half of the 20th century. In doing so, it broadens our understanding of the global dimensions of Greek shipping beyond the more familiar Atlantic and Mediterranean contexts, while also offering insights into the foundations of the so-called Greek shipping miracle in the early 20th century. Okay. So the Greek shipping miracle, what is this? It occurred during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. And this term refers to the rapid transformation of Greek-owned shipping from a predominantly Mediterranean sailing trade into a globally integrated transshipping system. From the 1870s onward, Greek ship owners shifted decisively from sail to steam, expanded beyond traditional Levantine and Aegean routes, and entered the Black Sea grain, British coal, and Atlantic bulk markets. As scholars such as Jelena Harlaftia and Ioannis Theotokas have shown, this expansion was not driven by a strong nation state, but by commercially agile private actors embedded in diaspora hubs like London, Marseille, and Odessa. Greek firms specialize in opportunistic no-liner transshipping, allowing them to redirect vessels quickly in response to freight rate fluctuations and geopolitical disruption. By the interwar period, Greek-owned fleets ranked among Europe's largest in trap tonnage, demonstrating a remarkable capacity to operate profitably in volatile global markets. A defining structural feature of this miracle was the organization of shipping as kinship-based, regionally rooted family capitalism. Maritime islands such as Chios, Kefalonia, Samos, and Andros generated dense networks of trust, capital pooling, and crew recruitment that functioned as transnational commercial diasporas rather than centralized corporations. These firms leveraged shared origin, intermarriage, and reputational mechanisms to reduce transaction costs and mobilize credit across borders, while maintaining flexibility in matters of flag, domicile, and political allegiance. Operating across Ottoman, Russian, British, and later Greek jurisdictions, ship owners developed a culture of adaptability that enabled survival through wars, state collapses, and regulatory shifts. The early 20th century rise of Greek shipping was therefore less a sudden boom than the outcome of long-term institutional evolution, a decentralized, network maritime capitalism uniquely suited to the uncertainties of global trade. Studies of the Greek shipping miracle have traditionally concentrated on the Mediterranean, Black Sea, and Atlantic worlds, leaving East Asia largely outside the main narrative of Greek maritime expansion. Yet Greek commercial and shipping networks did reach China as early as 18th century through two principal routes. The first was overland, following the expansion of the Russian Empire across the Black Sea into Siberia, where Greek merchants engaged in trade such as furs before moving toward Chinese markets. The second was maritime via the Indian Ocean and the Asiatic Pacific. Ottoman Greek merchants, often in partnership with Armenian traders, operated along the sea lanes linking the Arabian Seas, Madras, Manila, Macau, and Canton, integrating themselves into the commercial circuits dominated by European powers. By the late 19th and especially the interwar period, these early connections evolved into more structured diaspora communities within China. After the Russian Revolution in 1917, Greek migrants from the Azov and Black Sea regions traveled through Siberia into northern Chinese cities such as Harbin, Beijing, and Tianjin. At the same time, their internationalization of Greek shipping brought ship owners, agents, and seamen to southern ports, including Shanghai, Guangzhou, and Hong Kong. In Shanghai, Greeks formed formal associations such as the Hellenic Benevolent Society, linking communities across multiple Chinese cities. These communities made consistent efforts to keep their compatriots in the homeland informed about their activities and needs in China. On the 3rd of April 1929, the Greek popular newspaper Acropolis published an article entitled, "Do you know that in China there are whole communities of Greeks?" The article stressed the urgent need to establish a local consulate in Shanghai, noting that Greece and China had not yet concluded a formal treaty and that France, previously being responsible for protecting Greek nationals in China, had recently withdrawn its protection. Furthermore, China was presented as a highly promising market for Greek products, particularly after a major Japanese steamship company inaugurated the first shipping line linking Japan to the port of Piraeus via Shanghai. The route's final destination was Istanbul, owing to its proximity to the Black Sea. It is safe to argue that the petition was written by Emmanuel Giannulatu, ship owner and then president of the Greek Benevolent Society. In 1934, Giannulatu told the China press that the Yamashita Steamship Company, a firm closely linked to Mitsui Bussan Kaisha, had chartered 22 Greek vessels. He confirmed that his firm acted as the local agent for these ships, which typically transported wheat from the Black Sea to Dalian, which is now called Dalian, Shanghai, and Vladivostok, before continuing to Japanese ports. So Giannulatu is the second from the left. This was corroborated a year later in a detailed article in the Greek shipping journal Naftika Chronika, which featured photographs of Yamashita's representative in Shanghai alongside Giannulatu, as well as an interview in which the representative praised him as the driving force behind the strengthening of Greek-Japanese shipping ties. Giannulatu's name is largely absent from existing studies of Sino-Greek maritime trade, despite his significant role in laying the foundations for this relationship. My research seeks to address that omission. So drawing from on archival material from the United States, the United Kingdom, France, Greece, Japan, China, Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Australia, The analysis highlights the importance of extending Greek shipping history into East Asia before 1949. This period has received little scholarly attention, partly because of the contemporary focus on Greece's involvement in China's Belt and Road Initiative, which has directed attention towards relations with the present Chinese regime. Yet the roots of this relationship were established many decades earlier. So a brief notes about the historical framework that we're working on here, because it's very complicated. So the fall of the last imperial Chinese dynasty, the Qing, occurred in 1911, 1912, according to some. Then it was followed by the founding of the Republic of China. Then 5 years later, we have the so-called warlord era, where every region had its own political ruler who struggled to actually govern the rest of China and claimed as being the legitimate government of China. Then we have a relatively stable period, the so-called Kuomintang period in the 1930s, where the capital of China was in Nanjing, and Kuomintang was in charge. Its rule was challenged by the communists, by the CCP, and then we have an end to the Civil War, a temporary end to the Civil War, which was followed by the Second Sino-Japanese War, World War II, and then we continue with the Civil War, and then 1949, it's the communists that come to the top. So I know it's a little bit complicated, but this is the context within which this story unfolds. So the central setting for Giannulatu's career was Shanghai. In the early 20th century, Shanghai was among the most cosmopolitan cities in the world, a hub of international finance, trade, and diplomacy, administered in part by foreign powers through the international settlement and the French concession. It attracted merchants, bankers, diplomats, and refugees from across the globe, making it a focal point of global capitalism in East Asia. At the same time, it was also associated with underworld economies, including the opium trade and smuggling, which formed part of the city's complex social fabric. Giannulatu, both as a representative of the Greek community and as a commercial actor, provides a useful vantage point for examining how Greeks were situated within this rather complicated environment. Emanuel Giannulatu was born in 1887 on the island of Samos, though his family traced his origins to Kefalonia. His father had fled political difficulties there due to his involvement in the anti-British activity and resettled in Samos. As a young man, Giannulatu served as the secretary to Themistoklis Sofoulis, who later became Prime Minister of Greece. In 1906, at the age of 19, Emanuel left Greece for China. His initial destination was Gifu, present-day Yantai, on the Shantung Peninsula. Gifu was a significant hub for the pongee silk trade, a fabric highly valued in the United States and Europe. For decades, Shantung had been central to Chinese silk production, with Gifu being its primary distribution center. The foreign community in Gifu included British, Japanese, and German residents. Other Greeks from Samos were already established in the region. Emanuel entered the silk trade through the China Merchants Pongee Association. I found this advertisement at a local newspaper, and I have circled Gianulatu's role. And within a few years, he had advanced to the position of foreign manager. At this time, the Japanese community was the most prominent foreign commercial presence in Gifu. Yet, before Japan consolidated its dominance in East Asia, Japanese firms often relied on non-Japanese intermediaries. Consequently, Japan quickly became a familiar market for local foreign merchants such as Giannulatu, who started exporting silk to a Japanese firm in 1912. Moreover, in the Chinese textile industry required active engagement with both grassroots organizations and state authorities, ranging from negotiations with producers to lobbying local elites for favorable tax policies. Merchant associations functioned as crucial intermediaries in this process, regulating commercial activity, setting standards, mediating disputes, and advocating before successive governments, whether the late Qing dynasty, regional warlords, or the nationalist regime, on issues such as tariffs, foreign competition, and legal reforms. In his role as foreign manager of the CMPA, Giannulatus was responsible for the association's external relations, overseeing contracts and negotiations with foreign buyers and partners, both inside China and abroad. As business expanded, he recognized the advantages of controlling transport as well as production, and began to explore acquiring vessels to handle the CMPA's exports. To support this growing enterprise, he invited his younger brother, Paul, Pavlos, to join him in China, and together they established their first shipping venture, Giannulatus Bros. Having his brother in Jufu to take care of business, Giannulatus then opened the CMPA's branch in Shanghai, the largest distribution center of the silk industry in China. Shanghai was and still is one of China's major ports for foreign trade and a city renowned for its international and cosmopolitan character. In a large part of the city, foreign presence was dominant, particularly in the foreign governed international settlement and the ever-expanding foreign concessions, areas which were forcibly acquired by foreign powers for their nationals. Giannulatus became as quickly attuned to the cosmopolitan character of Shanghai as he had been to the Chinese-dominated networks of Jufu. His later activities intersected with bodies such as the American and French Chambers of Commerce, the Exporters Association, the Shanghai Fire Insurance Association, and the Silk Exporters Association. He was also involved in the French and American clubs and reportedly favored attending their horse races, one of the principal leisure activities of the city's elite expatriate society. He married Chrysol Lillian Lederer, an American woman for whom little is known. Among his notable business connections was Paul Lebris, a French entrepreneur who served as president of the French Municipal Council and later became managing partner of the Lebris Export-Import, operating between Shanghai and Paris. Giannulatus' sphere of influence expanding beyond the networks of the foreign colonial elites in China to encompass local business and political circles as well. As indicated in the accompanying advertisement here, the president of the CMPA was a former governor of Nanjing, a position that underscored the association's prestige and the considerable political connections within Giannulatus' network. Around that time, Giannulatus also claimed to the Chinese press that he had been commenced twice by the Peking government in 1915 for his efforts to promote the introduction of China silk to foreign countries. By the late 1920s, Sino-Greek relations began to formalize. In 1929, Greece and China signed a treaty of amity, which created the possibility of official Greek consular representation in Shanghai. For the Greek community, this was a significant development, and Emmanuel emerged as the principal candidate for the position. In 1932, he was appointed honorary vice consul, and in 1934, honorary consul. The raising of the Greek flag at the new consulate marked Greece's first formal diplomatic representation in China. His appointment, however, was contested. In October 1932, a letter signed by Mexis, the secretary of a local Greek association, was submitted to the Chinese government requesting that the appointment be canceled. He argued that the decision was, quote unquote, against the spirit of the Chinese Hellenic Treaty, which noted explicitly prohibited merchants from being appointed as consuls by the contracting parties. According to Mexis, the appointment served only Giannulatus' personal ambitions, and in his view, Giannulatus was hardly known for having any pro-Chinese feelings. In another letter, Mexis further expanding on this by specifying that Giannulatus shipped Chinese goods through Giannulatus Bros on account of a Japanese shipping company named Mitsui Busan Kaisha. It should be noted that these allegations came only a year after the First Battle of Shanghai, a brief but intense military confrontation between Chinese and Japanese forces in Shanghai, triggered by Japanese attempts to further extend their influence in China. The fighting caused widespread destruction and civilian casualties, and some scholars argue that it provided the canvas and the matrix on which Japan would later build its strategy and military operations during the Second Sino-Japanese War in 1937. During this period, widespread anti-Japanese boycotts swept across China, with protesters and nationalist groups calling for the boycott of Japanese goods, strikes against Japanese businesses, and the promotion of domestic products as a form of economic resistance. Therefore, Mexi's accusations appear to have been well-grounded. As shown earlier, Giannulatu had been photographed alongside Yamashita's representative Shanghai. In the same article, the latter praised Giannulatu as the driving force behind the strengthening of Greek-Japanese shipping ties. These connections could have seriously jeopardized Giannulatu's chances of securing the appointment. He thus mobilized both his professional and official networks in an effort to reinforce his legitimacy in the eyes of Chinese authorities. His main contact within the Greek government was Nikolaos Politis, the Greek ambassador to Paris, whom he pressed to reassure his Chinese counterpart in Paris that he had had only minimal dealings with Japan, limited to a Japanese firm he had once worked with in Jufu, and that in fact he had not set foot in Japan for over a decade. The Greek embassy in Paris also acknowledged its support of Giannulatu's nomination to the Chinese government on 11 May 1933. Giannulatu additionally sought support locally, most notably through the Honan and Shantung Pongji Silk Guild of Shanghai, which addressed a petition to the Chinese Minister for Foreign Affairs in Nanjing. In their letter, the guild endorsed Giannulatu as a reputable silk merchant established in Shanghai and Jufu for more than 20 years, praising his efforts to promote Chinese silk abroad and to strengthen Sino-Greek relations. They further emphasized his personal character, describing him as a very kind man, liked by all that have met him, and urged the Chinese government to recognize his appointment as Greek consul in Shanghai. Despite the support of Chinese and Greek institutions, the position of the Greek community in Shanghai remained the significant obstacle to his campaign. He thus circulated a petition among Greek residents in Shanghai requesting them to sign in support of his appointment as honorary consul of Greece. The petition was finally signed by 84 members of the Greek community and submitted to the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs, along with letters of support from other Greek communities in China. Meanwhile, Mexis continued his campaign against Giannulatu together with Peter Chrysanthopoulos, who signed as secretary of the Hellenic Chamber of Commerce in China. Naturally, the accusations and controversies surrounding Giannulatu alarmed the Chinese government. Thus, the central authorities in Nanjing instructed the Municipal Public Security Bureau of Shanghai to investigate his background. According to a report dating 17 March 1933, Giannulatu was found to have previously resided in Jufu for approximately 27 years and only ostensibly managed Chinese silk, but secretly also smuggled small amounts of arms and contraband. A detailed investigation revealed that there were approximately 120 Greek nationals in Shanghai, but fewer than 10 were operating legitimate businesses. The report was signed by Wu Tianchen, Shanghai's last mayor before the outbreak of the 1937 Sino-Japanese War. At the time, Wu was tasked with executing the Kuomintang's campaign to reassert control over the city, aiming to demonstrate to the world that the Chinese government could uphold its territorial sovereignty against foreign powers whose citizens, shielded by extraterritorial privileges, often evaded justice and committed crimes with impunity. Since the 1920s, Shanghai had experienced skyrocketing crime rates, including narcotics trafficking, prostitution, and kidnapping. In response, the Kuomintang established the Municipal Public Security Bureau, which was to be its primary instrument for cracking down on crime in Shanghai. But as Frederick Wakeman shows in his research, fighting crime quickly became a lower priority for nationalists in Shanghai. By the 1930s, the city had also become a stronghold of the communists, their primary domestic political rival. Japan's strong aggression in 1932 caused a major blow to the Kuomintang's legitimacy and also fueled anti-imperialist movements supported by the communists. Famously, China's president, Chiang Kai-shek, chose to focus on his domestic rivals, the communists first, before dealing with Japan, with foreign aggression. His approach was summarized in the slogan, first internal pacification, then external resistance. For Wu's administration in Shanghai, this meant that in attempting to suppress the communists in Shanghai, he had to strategically ally with foreign authorities, namely the administrators of the international settlement and the French concession, who equally saw communism as a threat. These same authorities, however, were the ones which largely turned a blind eye on foreign gang leaders, drug lords, and smugglers operating within their jurisdiction. Especially the French concession was regarded as the center of most illegal activities in the city. Greeks, as mentioned earlier, were under the protection of the French prior to 1929. This had naturally led those living in Shanghai to reside within the crime-ridden French concession. During the 1920s, Greeks gained a notorious reputation when prominent figures within their community emerged as some of the world's most infamous drug lords, operating extensive international networks. In the United States, the opium trade had been effectively banned for non-medical purposes since the 1909 Opium Exclusion Act, which, with stricter regulation, introduced under the 1914 Harrison Act. In Europe, the trade was curtailed by the 1912 Hague Opium Convention and further enforced during the 1920s in line with international agreements. Among those involved, Elias Iliopoulos stands out as perhaps the most widely studied figure in Shanghai's underworld during this period. Iliopoulos was a wealthy cosmopolitan Greek businessman turned drug trafficker who dominated the European narcotics trade between 1928 and 1931. Fluent in multiple languages and well-connected, he built strong supplier networks to ship large quantities of morphine and heroin to China and the United States. In China, he benefited from political protection within the French concession, but his career ended abruptly when rivals exposed him to French authorities in France, leading in turn to the collapse of his protection in China and ultimately forcing him into retirement. Correspondence between US and French drug agents reveals that Iliopoulos' investigation implicated other Greeks in Shanghai, including the Giannulatou's brothers, whose telegraphic address was Honeybros. These documents show that when Wu signed the 1933 report of the Municipal Public Security Bureau on Giannulatou's, the French were already suspicious of his involvement in arms and narcotics trafficking. Given that Wu's political forces cooperated with foreign authorities at the time in their anti-communist campaign, it is quite possible that this report resulted from a joint investigation. However, this collaboration likely explains why Giannulatou's remained beyond the reach of prosecution. Iliopoulos had been arrested under pressure from the metropole, meaning France, but no such pressure existed in Giannulatou's case. Moreover, cracking down on crime in foreign control areas was at the time a lower priority for Wu and the Kuomintang. Even Giannulatou's well-known connections with Japan were largely overlooked, as the Kuomintang remained preoccupied with its internal adversaries, the communists. The reluctance to take firm action against Giannulatou's is particularly evident in another letter of Wu to the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs dated 17 March 1934. The report stated that pursuant to instructions, the Municipal Public Security Bureau of Shanghai had conducted another covert investigation, which confirmed that Giannulatou's did enjoy significant support within the local Greek business community. However, the composition of his supporters is described as, quote, complicated, without further expanding on this. In a similar tone, the report continues by vaguely stating that Giannulatu had received, and I quote here, numerous accusations by various individuals within foreign diplomatic circles. Despite these allegations, he said that no evidence of criminal activity on his part had been discovered. Therefore, in June 1934, the Chinese government informed the Greek Ministry for Foreign Affairs that it accepted Giannulatu's appointment as an honorary vice consul of Shanghai. A month later, Giannulatu raised the Greek flag outside the Greek consulate at 120 Jinki Road. In another letter to the director of the Department for International Affairs within the Chinese Ministry for Foreign Affairs, Gao Xiangzhou, whom he addressed rather casually as my dear, Giannulatu stressed his intention of serving as a link for two of the oldest and most civilized countries in the world. The local press heralded the news of Giannulatu's appointment. The North China Herald's article also published his official statement, and I quote here, "My appointment is an honorary one, and I will continue to serve until such time as my government decides to send to Shanghai a consul general from home. In the meantime, I shall strive to serve the interests of our communities under my jurisdiction and to cultivate closer commercial intercourse between my country and China, two of the oldest countries of the world, China and Greece, commercially know very little of each other. I am therefore happy for the opportunities this appointment will afford me to work for and serve the interests of both." Greece's appointment of a consul in Shanghai for the first time marked a major breakthrough in Sino-Greek relations, but it also exposed the dark underbelly of the local Greek community. Feuds, smuggling, accusations of secret alliances with foreign powers, criminal investigations, and compromising rumors were not unusual in 1930s Shanghai, often described by those living there as a heaven built on top of a hell. It was in this context that Giannulatu retained the position of honorary consul of Greece. The early 1930s saw a remarkable rise of Greek shipping worldwide. In 1933, for the first time, Greek vessels regularly called at East Asia ports. By 1934, 20 Greek ships reached Shanghai. Sensing opportunity, Emmanuel and his partners launched a new company, China Hellenic Lines. This was no small enterprise. The company managed fleets, offered charters, and represented other Greek ship owners. Branches opened not only in Shanghai, but also in Dairen, Kobe, London, and Piraeus. By 1938, China Hellenic Lines controlled or managed at least 8 vessels, and records suggest that's as many as 15 more. The company became the leading Greek shipping presence in East Asia. Emmanuel positioned himself at the crossroads of trade between China, Greece, and Japan. Shipping journals in Greece celebrated these achievements as proof that the Greek flag was becoming respected in the so-called Far East. But again, shadows lurked. One of Emmanuel's partners was Ioannis Tsoumias, another Greek from Samos. Police suspected him of smuggling arms and heroin. Trials in Paris and the United States revealed networks connecting Tsoumias to the Italian mafia and the Japanese Yakuza. Emmanuel's association with him raised questions. While Emmanuel's degree of knowledge or involvement remains uncertain, his association with Tsoumias further complicated his public reputation. For a while, China Hellenic Lines benefited from the Chinese government's policy of first internal pacification, then external resistance. By 1937, however, this dynamic shifted dramatically. In July of that year, the skirmishes between China and Japan that had persisted since 1931 escalated into full-scale war, marking the beginning of the Second Sino-Japanese War. Meanwhile, the nationalists and the communists reached an agreement to suspend the civil war and form the Second United Front in resistance to Japan's invasion. In other words, the political landscape in which China Hellenic Lines had emerged rapidly unraveled. Japan had now become Chiang Kai-shek's overriding priority, and any businessman maintaining ties with the Japanese came under intense scrutiny. Conversely, those closely associated with the Kuomintang found themselves targeted by the Japanese authorities. This sea change was almost immediately felt by Giannulatu and his partners. In 1937, the Japanese military occupied the Chinese-administered areas of Shanghai, while the international settlement and the French concession remained neutral. During this period, the Japanese authorities began to view Giannulattu's and China Hellenic lines as agents of China, of the Kuomintang. This perception is evident in correspondence between Giannulattu's and the Japanese authorities concerning the seizure of Trump steamers SS Caravados and Anovathi by the Japanese Navy. Both vessels had been purchased by a Japanese firm by Stamatelatos and Tsunyas, respectively, who were Giannulattu's partners. Nevertheless, the Japanese government informed Giannulattus that it would not recognize any alteration of the nationality of the steamer, of the ship, declaring that the seizure was a measure of reprisal for the sinking by the Chinese of steamers belonging to a Japanese firm, even though both Caravados and Anovathi were sailing under the Greek rather than the Chinese flag. Seeing his fleet rapidly dwindling, Giannulattus leveraged his political connections to halt what seemed like an irreversible financial catastrophe. This is evidenced by a telegram sent to Chiang Kai-shek from his close aide, Huang Renglin, dated 28 May 1939, which unveils the Japanese government's desire to use Greek nationals to secure peace talks. According to the telegram, the Greek government had been asked by Japanese authorities to mediate Sino-Japanese peace, which Greece agreed to. The Japanese stated previous peace attempts through Westerners had failed due to leaks and vested interests. The Greek envoy in Tokyo tasked Giannulattus in Shanghai with finding a suitable person to deliver a message to Chongqing, where the nationalist government had moved after Japan's invasion to Nanjing. The person chosen to deliver the message was a Greek businessman named Vlachos, because he was reportedly a relative to Giannulattus, and he was close to the Chinese government, and was one of the only two Greek nationals living in Chongqing. The telegram details a remarkable covert mission to serve as a clandestine courier. The Japanese emphasized to Vlachos three crucial points: absolute secrecy, delivery directly to Chiang Kai-shek, and correct timing. After confidential meetings in Shanghai with senior Japanese officials, including Colonel Hiroshi Wada, Vlachos carried a sealed letter to Chongqing in August 1939. Upon arrival, Huang Renglin and Vice President Kung vetted the letter, which apparently contained only vague proposals for Sino-Japanese friendship, before passing it to Chiang Kai-shek on 6 August. Chiang promptly placed Vlachos under house arrest and denied publicly that the letter had ever been received, effectively neutralizing Japan's approach. Giannulattu's attempt to mediate peace talks between China and Japan was his final, though ultimately unsuccessful, effort to safeguard his investments. World War II only deepened the crisis. Japan's alliance with Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy made Greeks aligned with the Allies even more vulnerable. The SS Panagis, named after Emmanuel's father, was seized and converted to a Japanese so-called hell ship used to transport prisoners. By 1945, nearly all the company's ships were gone, sunk, seized, or lost. This represents a largely overlooked aspect of Greece's confrontation with the Axis during World War II, one that situates this history not only exists beyond within the borders of Greece, but also beyond the geographic scope of Europe itself. Ultimately, the war had destroyed the foundation Emmanuel had built for 3 decades. After the war in 1946, Emmanuel left Shanghai. He shifted to a new line of business, migration shipping. He invested in ships carrying Greeks from China to Australia, part of the great post-war wave of immigration. His brother Paul briefly took over as consul in Shanghai, but the communist victory in 1949 ended all foreign privileges. By the early 1950s, Paul had relocated to New York. Archival records and newspaper accounts from the United States provide a complex picture of Paul's activities between 1946 and 1953. These sources suggest that he recognized early on the likely outcome of the Chinese Civil War and began cultivating ties with the communists. As noted earlier, Túñez had maintained links with local communist groups since the 1920s, when he was suspected of arms smuggling. In the 1930s, despite his evident connections with the Kuomintang, his brother appeared in extensive investigative files on suspected communist associates compiled during an inquiry into a vast Singapore-based communist network coordinating the Kuomintang, the CCP, and affiliated organizations across East Asia. Following the Second World War, Paul's name also appeared in records at the US consulate in Tianjin on war criminals and suspected communists, although without specific details about his activities. By 1948, 1 year before the CCP's final victory, a CIA report alleged that Paul had offered to procure and charter vessels for Soviet-backed Russian bunkers, ostensibly to facilitate coal exports from Shanghai to Indochina. These findings strongly suggest that Paul, and possibly Emmanuel as well, had developed connections with the CCP. Nevertheless, in 1953, according to American banker J.J. Thompson, Paul was abruptly dismissed from his post. Reports in the American press following his arrival in the United States were largely unfavorable. A 1953 article, for instance, labeled him a Japanese collaborator, a smuggler, and a communist. Regardless of the extent of Paul's association with communist circles, a broader point emerges here. Harlafti has documented the collaboration of Greek ship owners with communist China during the Mao era, particularly throughout the US embargo in the 1950s and 1960s. However, the case of Giannulatu's brothers and the China Hellenic Lines pushes this connection further back, revealing its roots in the period of the Chinese Civil War. In conclusion, the case of Emmanuel Giannulatus and China Hellenic Lines illustrates several important aspects of Greek shipping diaspora history. First, it demonstrates that Greek maritime activity during the first half of the 20th century was not confined to the Mediterranean or the Atlantic, but extended into East Asia. Secondly, the story demonstrates that engagement with the CCP occurred well before 1949. So far, scholars have argued that Greek ship owners started collaborating with the communist regime from the 1960s onwards. Finally, the legacy of Giannulatus and his associates lies in the adaptability that characterized and still characterize actually Greek shipping as a whole. From silk to shipping, from trade to migration transport, they adjusted their activities in response to shifting circumstances. Their story broadens our understanding of the so-called Greek shipping miracle, situating it within a truly global context and reminding us that the foundations of Sino-Greek maritime relations were laid long before their present prominence. Thank you.
That was absolutely fascinating, Giorgos. I mean, I've read part of your research, but this is, I mean, I must say, in many ways, you are rewriting global history here. It's not just
Hope so.
It's not just a marginal kind of figure in the middle of nowhere. Now,